Hi guys, so as Boris Johnson continues his battle to distract the public from his own failings, be it to follow the rules that he made himself, to deal with the cost of living crisis and the disaster that is Brexit, he's once again hitting out at the EU as it's an easy scapegoat during difficult times. The UK presented legislation on Monday that would unilaterally, and that is the key word here, acting on its own, attempt to undo parts of the international agreement. What did the European Commission have to say about that? Well, Maros Sefcovic was clearly very angry and believes it breaks international law.
Good morning. On Monday, the UK government tabled legislation confirming its intention to unilaterally break international law. More precisely, to break an agreement that protects peace and stability in Northern Ireland, an agreement that we reached together only 2 years ago. Let there be no doubt. There is no legal nor political justification whatsoever for unilaterally changing an international agreement. Opening the door to unilaterally changing an international agreement is a breach of international law as well. So let's call a spade a spade. This is illegal.
Now, just to clarify something that he said here, the intention as well, and I've mentioned that before, the UK government may not actually go ahead and remove parts of the protocol, but by setting in motion the possibility for ministers to do that, that is also a breach of international law.
The UK bill is extremely damaging to mutual trust and respect between the EU and the UK. It has created deep uncertainty and casts a shadow over our overall cooperation. All at the time when respect for international agreements has never been more important.
Of course, this is a reference to what's happening in Russia and other agreements around the world where it's important. Yes, it's very important at this moment that international agreements are respected, and the UK government, which is demanding that other countries respect international agreements, isn't doing that.
That is why the Commission has today decided to take legal action against the United Kingdom for not complying with significant parts of the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland. We have been withholding this legal action over the last year because we wanted to create a constructive atmosphere to find solutions. The UK government's decision has left us with no choice but to act. First, we are proceeding a step further with the infringement process we launched in March 2021 regarding, for instance, the movement of agri-food. If the UK doesn't reply within 2 months, we may take them to the Court of Justice. Second, we are launching 2 new infringements against the UK. One for failing to carry out the necessary controls at the border control posts in Northern Ireland by ensuring adequate staffing and infrastructure.
And I've talked about this before on the channel, how the UK government said, don't worry to the EU, we will carry out the checks. You don't need to have your staff in Northern Ireland, we will do it. Leave it to us. And the EU and the European Commission precisely went along with that and said, okay, we trust you. We trust you to carry out these checks. And I've been covering it for months now, how there isn't the proper infrastructure in place. The UK government has not implemented that part of the agreement, and they haven't provided enough staff to carry out these checks. And that's why there have been certain delays on certain goods. So when the UK government says, look, there are delays on goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, this is because of the protocol. No, it's because you have not provided the staff necessary to carry out the checks. And you blame the checks and you blame the protocol instead of taking responsibility and saying, okay, we didn't provide enough staff. And we don't have the right infrastructure. I don't know how much of this has changed since the last time I talked about it, but at the time last year, there were prefabricated buildings instead of permanent infrastructure being used.
And one for failing to provide the EU with essential trade statistics data to enable the EU to protect its single market.
Now, this is something that Liz Truss just talked about now. And of course, this was something that I mentioned before as well. About a year ago, almost a year ago, the UK government were supposed to be providing live data on goods moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland a year ago. Just, when people say that especially Brexiteers and Boris Johnson's government say that the EU is inflexible, they've been waiting a year for you to implement part of the agreement that you signed. You said, yes, we will do this. And they've been waiting and waiting, and a year has passed and they still don't have access to that data. And now you're saying, yeah, we're going to implement that data. Who would say that's reasonable? I understand that there are problems, but the British government wanted to go as fast as possible to implement this. Why? Because they wanted to have a trade deal they could sell to the Brexiteers after. They just wanted to do everything as quick and dirty as possible. The EU said, you need more time. If you want to do it right, you need more time. And the UK government said, no, don't worry, we will do it. We will have it all implemented. We'll have it all ready to go from day one. And now we're over a year after, and it's still not ready. And commentators and politicians will point to this guy and the European Union as being inflexible.
Ladies and gentlemen, the protocol was the solution agreed with the UK government to protect the Good Friday Belfast Agreement in all its dimensions, avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland, and protect the integrity of the EU's single market. We know that there are some practical difficulties in implementing it. We have said so openly. That is why my team and I had been engaging extensively with all stakeholders on the ground.
And the stakeholders he's talking about here is politicians in Northern Ireland and business leaders in Northern Ireland. And I've covered before how business leaders had asked the European Commission, is it possible to make certain modifications to checks that have to be carried out, reduce some of the paperwork? And the EU responded in such a positive way, the European Commission, had responded in such a positive way that businesses were pleasantly surprised by the amount of change that was provided to them. And businesses in Northern Ireland are doing well, and Manufacturing Northern Ireland, for example, has described the protocol as essential, and removing it or undermining it would create instability there.
Resulting in a set of solutions put forward in October showing genuine and unprecedented flexibility. For example, our proposals would reduce sanitary and phytosanitary checks and controls by more than 80%. They would cut customs paperwork in half, create an express lane for goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, simplify certification, a single 3-page document for a whole lorry full of different goods. And they would allow even the movement of certain goods that would otherwise be restricted, such as chilled meat, like sausages.
And this is what I've been talking about as well, how there have been exceptions made for Northern Ireland. Chilled meats are not supposed to go into the single market. The European Commission has said, OK, we'll make an exception for Northern Ireland, as long as those goods don't find their way into the rest of the single market. They stay in Northern Ireland. And I think that was a reasonable compromise to make. But it was not enough for Brexiteers. It was not enough for the DUP.
This is a solid offer, making a tangible difference on the ground. Today, we have fleshed out these proposals, proving they can work and they can work fast. We have even published the draft certificates that businesses would need to fill out, showing just how simple and easy they are to fill in. And I would like to show it to you. These are the 3 pages which need to be filled per lorry or once per month. Not 300, not 33. This is how simple it is, and this is what we can do if we work well together.
And there's the key point. If we work well together, we can reduce these checks. If we work well together, we can reduce the paperwork. We have to work together. But you can't work with somebody who does not want to work well, with somebody who doesn't want Northern Ireland to succeed. Because if Northern Ireland succeeds, then it exposes Brexit to be the failure that it is.
Because our proposals are all about simplification and therefore in stark contrast with, for instance, a dual regulatory regime proposed by the UK. A dual set of rules, EU and UK, would lead to a mountain of paperwork and bureaucracy enough to bury a small business in Northern Ireland that wants to profit from access to both the UK's internal and the EU's single market at once.
And as I said, the UK government do not care about businesses in Northern Ireland. They don't care about the people of Northern Ireland. This is about protecting Brexit. So this dual system that's been presented by Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, as he said, yes, it would create more paperwork because you'd have to complete paperwork for one side and for the other. Instead, you just have paperwork for one side. So doesn't that make sense? But this is not about fixing problems. It's about creating problems. That's since the beginning. Lord Frost, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, all they're interested in doing is creating problems. And the core reason behind that, it seems, and I've yet to hear a better answer, is to show that Northern Ireland cannot work. To make it as difficult as possible for Northern Ireland to work so that it protects Brexit. Because we can see the data. Businesses in Northern Ireland are happy or reasonably happy with the protocol. Yes, there are problems. Things have to be fixed. But Northern Ireland is in a much better position than Scotland, England or Wales. Businesses in Scotland are crying out for something like the Northern Ireland Protocol. They would love to be able to export into the European single market in the same way that Northern Ireland can. Even the head of the Northern Ireland Select Committee was talking about how businesses in his constituent in England were crying out, would bite someone's arm off to have something like the Northern Ireland Protocol. And all the while you have the likes of the DUP, who represent a minority in Northern Ireland, and not a minority, because the vast majority of members of the Northern Ireland Assembly want the protocol implemented. And they're being ignored, in the same way as the people of Northern Ireland voted against Brexit and they were ignored. And who's been listened to? The DUP, who don't care about peace in Northern Ireland. Let's call a spade here as well. The DUP do not give a crap about peace in Northern Ireland. They want a hard border on the island of Ireland, and to hell with the consequences. So it seems this is the first step. Legal action will be taken against the United Kingdom. Now, this is going to take a long time. This is not going to be something you're going to see immediately. It's going to be at least a year before we see the consequences of this. And it's going to be probably about a year before we see the consequences of Boris Johnson attempting to tear up the Northern Ireland Protocol. Because the legislation has to go through the House of Commons. It has to go to the House of Lords. The House of Lords is going to reject some of it, if not all of it. And it's going to bounce back and forth for a while. And it's likely that Boris Johnson will just drop it at the end because it has served its purpose. It's made the EU look like the bad guy. It's attempting to create instability in Northern Ireland, discourage investment, and it will protect Brexit, or at least Brexit in the minds of the public. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.